Hello and welcome everyone. It is an absolute honor to welcome Dr. Manfred Steiner, who got his third doctorate last year at the age of 89. He earned his first doctorate, a medical degree, from the University of Vienna in 1955. He earned his second doctorate, a PhD in biochemistry from MIT in 1967, 17 years later. His third doctorate, and this is very special, he completed his PhD in physics from an Ivy League university, Brown University, at the age of 89. Oh my goodness. In today's very special session, we have two main objectives. Number one, why should anyone bother doing a PhD after the age of 40, 50, 60, or 70? Why would it be worth doing so? And the second objective is to ask Dr. Steiner how he can keep his mind sharp at this age. And we are going to learn about his routine and going to get some tips from him. So over to you, Dr. Steiner, with the question, why should anyone bother doing a PhD after the age of 40 or 50 or 60?
This is a very good question, Dr. Aslam. It was a lifelong dream of myself. Basically, after I learned physics in high school, I was fascinated by the subject. I started to read first about biographies of famous physicists. Then I dabbled into, books about physics, tried to understand it beyond what was taught in school. And I did quite well. And I thought, gee, I was very interested in mathematics, and that helped me to understand physics. The little bit I knew was far better understandable to me when I compared it to my mathematical knowledge. So I began to read about it, and I grew up at the time after the war, the Second World War, I should say, when it was very difficult in Austria. And my father had died in the war, and my mother was alone with me, and I had an uncle who was a physician. And he convinced me and my mother that at the time that I was studying now, about 7, 6, 8 years after the war, that a medical school training would be far better for me than physics. Well, I was a young guy. I just thought these are my aged, my older people that know better than I do what is good for me. So I accepted their proposal to go to medical school. And I did that. And it actually, it wasn't. My father originally, before he was killed in the war, was a phytopathologist. That means he was interested in botany, particularly the pathology of plants. And so I always was interested in science. I interested in how magnetism and how centrifuges worked and how the centrifugal force was there, how we got heavier. So it was a very stimulating for me to look into physics. But then, I said, all right, I do medicine. And I was quite successful. After I finished my medical school, I immediately went to the United States because I had some friends there, and they gave me a position, and I did very well in medicine. I must say, I did like it. I was particularly in research. I mean, my career was mostly academic, some clinical work too, I should say. But my big dream was always physics. I loved it. I loved the precision. I could not, as a young man there, I could not understand how can something on the astronomical scale be comparable to something on the atomic or subatomic scale. I mean, there are there are 60 maybe or 70 orders of magnitude difference between these two. And how can these physical laws apply to both of them? It was fascinating me. So even during my medical school time, some of the institutes in Vienna are very close to the Theoretical Physics Institute. Actually, just across the street, where Boltzmann was a very famous Austrian physicist around the turn of the 20th century, the early 1900s. And he taught there. And I sneaked in after middle school lessons were over to listen to some physics classes, of which I didn't understand too much, but it was stimulating to me. So it was a dream that I always had. I wanted to be a physicist. And I said, well, of course, I'm entrenched now in the United States in a medical career. I wanted to learn more research, wanted to be more research oriented. And at that time, in the 1960s, the US government started a traineeship in medicine. A traineeship meant to make physicians more research oriented, to give them a perspective to do research that was really oriented towards medicine, not like biologists who would do something a little bit different, but this was geared to medicine. And I was fortunate to go to MIT, a good school, and I loved it there. And I finished my traineeship. And after I finished this, I thought, well, I might as well go for a PhD. And biochemistry was the natural thing for me because I was interested in biochemistry, applying it to medicine. And I was a hematologist. I trained in hematology. And hematology was actually one of the leaders in medical research. Not kidney or lung or any other specialty, but particularly hematology, and part of it was also oncology, the early oncology. We're talking about the mid-1950s, the early 60s. So, but the dream of being a physicist once in my life never left me. I love this precision in medicine, in physics, that I missed in medicine. Medicine, there are too many variables. When you deal with patients, you have to apply something. There are too many different things that can go wrong and can influence the outcome of an experiment. But in physics, I was always so surprised you could get a clear, very clear answer, at least to my understanding at that time. Now I know there are some times where you don't get a clear understanding, but that was my naive understanding at that time. But, once you're entrenched in a career, your life, you have a family, you have children, the way is laid out for you. You cannot just say, I struck this off all together and I start something new. I mean, I had to take care of a family and children. So my path was restricted. But the dream of becoming a physicist once in my life, I said, never left me. And once I retired from medicine, after 47 years doing medical research and practicing medicine, I said, now it's time to pursue my dream. Now I have time. First, I tried to go to MIT. I lived in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is a very small state. It's about 50 miles away from Boston, where MIT is, or Cambridge, I should say. But it was too much for me. And I said, I taught at Brown University, the fledgling medical school that started in the 60s. I was there in the beginning, and I grew to, a full professorship and led the department of hematology. And I said, once now I'm retired, now I'm trying to go back to MIT, but it was too much for me. I was commuting by train, sitting in the train station. So I said, this is no good. We have a great university in Providence, Brown University, where I taught medical school for almost 30 years. Why not go there? And so I started there. I fulfilled my dream. I started basically as an ordinary student, did classes in undergraduate classes in physics, because I had a few, but not too many. And then I began graduate school, and I looked for an advisor, and I found one that was willing to take on a septuagenarian. I mean, a guy who is 70 some years old, which was not an easy undertaking. I mean, some of them, I was very friendly with them, and they liked me as a former colleague. Even so, the medical school, when it began at Brown University, was not well liked by the other departments, because it sucked money away from their budgets, the medical school. But nevertheless, they did accept me very well almost as a colleague in a different specialty. And I pursued the classes just with all the other students, who accepted me very well. I mean, they thought they didn't quite make out what I was going to do, an old guy like this, but they accepted me. They were very friendly. They took me into their discussions when they had, problem solving, so what. So I finished my graduate classes eventually, and then went on to a thesis. Of course, at my age, medical problems do arise. Medical problems that affected me very much, but fortunately, none of them were lasting. I could overcome them. I mean, I was quite sick several times, but I overcame them. And I'm now in good health. And after finishing now with my degree in theoretical physics, I am continuing to study physics. Well, right now I'm writing a paper about my part of my thesis. In a PhD graduate's life, the thesis is probably the biggest scientific work that he ever does, because there's nothing as long as deep searching as a thesis. But I want to publish part of my thesis because it is a very interesting subject that continues to interest me. And I'm also lucky to have a former mentor now, since I'm a postdoc, but we are working together, even so he is interested in a slightly different general area now, other than the one that I am doing. I'm doing one that he would have liked to finish, but in the meantime, because of necessity, because of he was just pushed into a different direction, but he still likes the area that I was interested in, bosonization. So there's a little bit why I pursued my dream. I said I felt well mentally, physically I had my problems, but mentally I always felt well. I could understand things, and I kept my mind sharp. I always reading and always searching the literature. And you have to be sharp eventually there. And I think maybe that helps somewhat to forestall any problems that now, so unfortunately, so many older people have, namely a loss of memory and so on.
Okay, so right now I am talking to a postdoctoral researcher who
Yeah.
spent 47 years in medicine.
Correct.
And that, correct, right?
Yes.
So you got retired, but you are not retired because you are a postdoctoral student in physics.
Yes.
Of all the things, physics
Well,
is much more tough according to my estimation rather than other softer subjects like humanities subjects, right? So
I
physics.
know it is, it's called hard science, and it is a bit more difficult. Yes. It's easier, let's say, political science or something like that, or history. I don't want to denigrate these subjects in any way. They are perfectly, up to the same level that physics is. But to understand physics, mathematics that you need as a language of physics, it's more difficult. But I also thought, what am I going to do when I retire? I wanted to retire from medicine because it was time to do it. And I thought, what am I going to do? I'm not interested too much in sports. I used to ski. I learned my lesson when I broke my leg. But nevertheless, I like to hike in the mountains. But they are climbing, which I would have loved to do. I had acrophobia, fear of heights. And they really, I had to work on it very hard to overcome trekking in the mountains sometimes. But I thought, I'm not going to sit at home reading books or doing something uninteresting. I wanted to continue with something that I loved all my life. Why not use the time now to do it? Fortunately, I
Excellent.
was able to do it.
Okay, excellent. And you talked about your family and family responsibilities. So my question is family a hindrance to achieving your goals?
Well, in a way, it is. I must be truthful that I felt always I have to have obligations to my family. I cannot say now I'm closing my door to my study and leave the family alone, and I do what I want and you can do what you want. You can't do that. You have a family, you have children, you want to see them grow up to become something very useful in life. Take a job that is, that satisfies them. So you have to get involved in the life of the family. I never could exclude that. It was ever part of mine. But I had time, I was in relatively good health at that time when I began. And I thought, so it takes a little bit longer for me, instead of as a radical school, a regular student, I would have taken 3 or 4 classes. I took 2 maybe a semester. And so it took a little bit longer, but I had time. I said the only limit to obtaining my degree was my final term when I would die. So I said, I want to do it before I do that. I want to get my degree. And they laughed
Okay.
that I was able to do that.
Okay. So the reason there is gender parity in STEM fields and other fields of research, it may lie in the fact that having a family, it puts an extra burden on you. And if you are going to achieve your career, so family is sometimes a hindrance for you. So did I get that right? So
Yes,
this is much more so for women because they have
yes,
extra child rearing responsibilities that men can, they can put it off.
yeah, that's right. You have responsibilities that you cannot shrug off and say, forget it. No, they are given to me, and I recognize that, and I try to do my best in that respect to fulfill these obligations and
Okay.
responsibilities.
Okay. And as for our second objective, you did mention that you kept reading books, different books to keep your mind sharp. So what other tips or routine that you followed that you can advise us to keep our minds sharp even as we age?
Well, I think I always kept, even relaxation. What I did, I've pursued something that was of some use to me in my studies. For instance, in Sudoku puzzles, they have a great. I mean, I've always used ones that are quite challenging, not the easy ones. But it trains you in logic, and I thought that was always good. I mean, it wasn't a burden, to do that. It was a desire to spend my life, to relax with something useful too. I mean, I did also some walking and hiking around in circumstances where I didn't have to climb. But I keep your mind sharp. That is, do something that engages your mind. Not, I mean, I wouldn't be against, let's say, playing golf or something like this, which I don't do. But I instead kept my mind sharp and always tried to do something that interested me and involved my mind, some puzzles or whatever relaxation was. It was something stimulating for the mind.
Okay. As far as your longevity is concerned, as far as I studied that literature, it does mention a strong genetic components to longevity rather than nutrition or exercise. Main component, or even smoking, even 80 years old and 19 years, they can be found habitual smokers, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
genetics has a strong component. And you talked about your father who died in Second World War.
yes.
So do you have any information about your grandparents that they used to live that much long? Something
Well,
like
my
that about your
grandparents,
genes.
yes, some of them lived into their 90s. They eventually died from heart attack. But of course, this was at an age where heart attacks were hard to treat. I mean, nowadays, with cardiologists put in stents and they allow people to live for long times with heart attacks that they had. That wasn't possible at one time before, but I had relatives that were very old in the 90s. My mother died of cancer, but she was in her 70s. So in my family, it's a mixed genetic background there. Some had died from diseases that are undesirable, like the malignant diseases, but most of them had died from heart problems. And I had my heart problems too, but they are now well under control. Yes.
Okay. So another question. You defended your PhD successfully in September 2021.
Yes.
So during those time, what was the effect of COVID restrictions, COVID lockdowns on completing your PhD? Were you delayed by it?
Well, it was certainly was a delay, yes. But eventually it was interesting. I went to, every PhD PhD defense has a committee of professors that are in physics. I am in theoretical physics. I have a doctorate now in theoretical physics. There were 2 theoreticians and 1 experimentalist. They, other than my mentor, my mentor and I were the only ones in the room where the actual defense of my dissertation took place. The other members of the committee came by Zoom. They were in the same building at Brown, but they came by Zoom. So there were some restrictions. They were very strict. You had to have face masks. It was a very dangerous time at the one, but now it is somewhat more relaxed. But nevertheless, that was a hindrance in some way. Yes, you could say that. Because, the link, during the preparation of my thesis, you have to have contact with your advisors to show them what you are doing, and they might give you some hint or not. But at that time, personally, it was impossible. But there was an application called Slack. You may know about that, where you can be in direct contact with your advisor, and you have a possibility of writing questions into your manuscript, asking questions, and he would give answers in there. So that was a good thing already. It's called Slack, SLACK, which is a direct communication. It's still very popular now.
Okay.
It took more time, but it could be overcome, this delay.
Okay. So you had a passion for physics that led you to completing your PhD at when you were octogenarian. So
Yes.
how can you sustain your passion? That's what I'm going to ask you, because we have passion, but that passion fades after 5 years or 10 years, you may call it.
Yes.
But your passion, you kept it while you got your degree in 1955, then a second PhD in biochemistry. You cannot have a PhD in biochemistry from MIT without passion. So you had your passion for biochemistry, but there was a stronger passion that was struggling, and you kept that passion alive. So I want to ask you, how can one develop a passion and keep it alive? That's my main question. Or is it just natural thing that comes to you?
Well, it's because the passion for it was so strong. It was so strong that I always thought I always felt I could have achieved far more in physics if I started my career in physics after the war, after I began college. But it's you have to. It's only the strength of this passion that is important. Because if I had just a passing interest in it, I would have given up then and said, well, now I reached it. and I forget it. But it still interests me. I still, I'm in condensed matter physics. That means the physics of subjects that you can grasp, that you can touch. Now I'm thinking of, after I finish my paper that I'm writing, I would like to study some cosmology, which would be, I'm reading by myself now. I'm an autodidact in this respect now. I have to rely on books and I have to rely on publications, but it interests me. So there is a little bit of a shift, but it is just a minor one. I'm still in physics. Physics is the underlying basis.
So my other question is, do you consider yourself a religious person or spiritual person, and what are your thoughts about that?
Well, yes, I consider myself a religious person. I find there's no disagreement between religion, that I have, and physics. I mean, some physicists I know, they say everything can be done without any interference of anything higher authority, let's say. But I think, I have my beliefs, and I find some of the physicists do too. Actually, Einstein always thought there was some higher authority in the universe. I mean, he didn't know as much at the time what was known now, but he certainly had a very, very keen mind in that respect. And and also, I mean, an Austrian logician, you may have heard about KurtGödel, who was a very famous one, who also went to Princeton before the war. And he was a colleague there. He was the only one Einstein could talk to, and Gödel would tell him, you are wrong in this respect. But it is interesting to me that he was certainly not a very religious person, I don't think. But he had an 8-point proof of the existence of a superior being, a logical one, purely logical. So it's interesting, yeah. I mean, there are some people that keep their faith, and it doesn't interfere with my research, my physics. I can always bring it together.
That's excellent. This was what the thinking of Pakistan's only science Nobel laureate was. This was the thinking of Dr. Abdus Salam. He also used to say,
yes.
He also used to say that my theories, they never interfere. Rather, my spirituality, it strengthens my my work. So that was his thinking as well. And in Pakistan, we seem to forget about that. And Pakistan is so much into religious extremism. But there are voices of reason who are saying that there is no clash. You don't need to clash these two things, spirituality and science. But there is the debate is for some other time.
Well, of course, I know well about the Salam that you mentioned, who worked in Trieste, I think, for a while. And I read some of his papers, who are very famous, of course. And I liked them, but I didn't know that he was a religious person. Well, you never, reading the science, you don't express this. But this is my belief, yes.
Yeah, and this is what science teaches. It teaches tolerance. two of his colleagues who shared Nobel Prize of Physics with him, they were both atheists. And one of
Yeah.
them is quite staunch anti-religious person.
Yeah.
So despite having their differences, they were best buddies.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I remember that. Yeah, I mean, most physicists think it can be all done without any superior being. There's no need for it. Well, I have my own belief. I left them their own. What if they think so? That's all right with me. I can't change their mind, but I do believe that the two can coexist, religion and physics.
Okay, Dr. Steiner, please tell me about your reading habits right now and when you were at your younger ages. So, what were your
Okay.
reading habits?
Well, I must tell you, actually, at one time, I was very interested in history. I read a lot about history when I was very young, and I still do read. History interests me very much. But my favorite ones when I was young was to read biographies of famous physicists. And it was so fascinating for me. It's like, reading about, for instance, Max Planck or other Einstein or Heisenberg or Feynman. These were very, very important people, and I was fascinated by their life, what brought them to it. As a mathematicians, I'm always reading in books, if I have a biography notice about the, let's say, the mathematician, I want to read it because I was always interested in what drives this man to go into mathematics and how was his background and so on. So these are my major readings. History, I continue to be interested in it. And, I'm not so much interested in mysteries or something. My wife is very, very interested in mysteries. But myself, I'm sort of, I can do without it.
Okay. If you have time, can I ask one more question?
Sure, of course.
Okay. You talked about mysteries, and your wife is much more interested in it. But still, since we are fiction book club, so I have to ask this question. What could be your favorite works of fiction, or you are not interested in fiction at all?
No, I don't. Interested book in fiction. I couldn't remember now one that I really would be so interested in that I remembered its name.
That's totally understandable for us theoretical physicists.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
And one more question. Have you met Lawrence Krauss?
Lawrence Krauss?
Yeah.
No, I have not.
Okay, okay. He's also a theoretical physicist, and he's one of my favorites. So I thought that you must have met him. Or have you met Einstein?
No, no.
Okay.
Einstein died in the mid-50s when I
Yeah.
was just finishing medical school. And no, I never met him, no. But I met another quite famous theoretician, an Austrian, called Walter Thierring, which most people would not recognize. But theoretical physics, he was very well known, and he was an Austrian. And actually, I was sneaking into his lectures during my medical school studies. When I had time, I tried to go across to the Physical Institute, and if I was lucky, I got to hear him talking about quantum physics, which was very new to me Abdus, and I really enjoyed that. But other physicists, well, met the one, of course, at Brown, Leon Cooper and Kosterlitz. There are two Nobel laureates there. I met most of them, and I've met a few others in medicine, actually. Yeah.
Okay, great. So my last question would be, any advice for our fiction book club? We are committed to reading good books and motivating ourselves through by inviting guests like you. And I think you are going to be the oldest guest in our fiction book club. So what advice would you like to give to our fiction book club members?
Well, of course, read whatever you're interested in. My interest may not be yours, may not be someone else's. I know that mine may be very special, but I like to read books. I like to read books, but I'm very narrowly confined to a certain area. But for anybody, I would say whatever they feel like they would like to read, read it. I think reading now is, I like still to have a book in my hand. I know I can read it from a screen, but it's not the same as when you have a book in your hand and you can turn the pages and you can come back to something that you read and you wanted to see if it, you have some idea and you want to compare it with what you read there. But I cannot get actually comfortable with reading from a screen. That is still very much, even papers. I know long papers, I have to print them out in order to hold this in my hand, not just reading it and then it's extinguished and I have to load it up again. So I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but it's now I can hear you again.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry, that the last few minutes, it was, I don't know why it happened.
Okay, that's fine. There must have been some problem. So I was saying that live stream have this problem, this inherent problem. Things can go wrong, but still we take this risk and invite guests of your stature to our show because we believe in open dialogues, open conversations. And
Yes.
live stream have the benefit that people can see things in as a raw data. So the guest cannot say that please edit this or that. So I think this is the most honest session, and the guests who appear on our show, it is a testimony of them showing that we have nothing to hide. This is an open conversation. It is like thinking out loud. So
Yeah.
that is why I always prefer live stream despite its limitations. Just like, I
Yeah.
had some problem with my audio. So thank you so much for appearing in our fiction book club. And now I'm going to end this meeting with your permission.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me, Dr. Arslan. It was a pleasure meeting you, and I will always treasure this interview. Yes, thank you. Speaking in Karachi, Pakistan, that is great for me. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.